This video is sponsored by Stream. Stream helps you to build scalable chat and activity feeds for your application. Stream also takes care of security, hosting, and scaling, so you can focus more on the functionality and building high-quality applications. Check out their SDKs for many different platforms. They have iOS with Swift and iOS with Swift UI, Flutter, Android, React, React Native, and so much more. To learn more about Stream, check the link in the description for more information. Hello everyone and welcome to Azam Shah Weekly. And in this video, you're going to learn how to create an app that will connect to a JSON API and then display the data into your UI table view in a UIKit application without using storyboards, all by writing code. So this is not a Swift UI application, this is a UIKit application. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select iOS app, that's perfectly fine. And now I'm going to provide some sort of a name. You can actually see over here that the interface is selected as storyboard and not Swift UI. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to just call it stocks app with UIKit. And you can save it anywhere you want. That's perfectly fine. Okay. Now, when I open up the app, let's go ahead and minimize the font size. I think it's too big. Perfect. So a couple of different things you will note when you create a UIKit application. You can see the storyboard is right there. First, I'm going to go ahead and select, let's say, iPhone 12 Pro Max. That will be my simulator. And we can check out the storyboard. Now, we will not be using storyboard in this particular video. There's nothing wrong with storyboards. I have used storyboards before. I have created many different apps using storyboards. That's fine. But the purpose of this video is to show you that how you can create something programmatically using code. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. Move to trash. Now, even though I have deleted it, there are a couple of other places where I have to go and remove it. So let's go to the Stocks App UIKit. And you can see right there in the Journal tab, you can see the main interface is set to main, which is basically storyboard. So let's go and remove that part. And let's go to info. This is your info.plist file. And we're going to look at application scene, and we're going to look at scene configuration. And somewhere over here inside the items, you will see the storyboard also. Now, instead of deleting the value of this, we're just going to delete the whole thing. There we go. All right. Okay, so this is pretty much it. Now you don't really have a storyboard. We have deleted. You have a launch screen over here. That's fine, I guess. But apart from that, you're not really using storyboard to construct your user interface. Once again, nothing wrong with storyboard, but we are just going with that route of no storyboards. Now, if we don't really have any storyboard, the question is, how will we even launch the application? So let's go back to the scene delegate. And inside the scene delegate, you can see that on line number 19, we're creating a scene. So let's go ahead and get that scene. Now, what we want to do is we want to construct a UI window. And inside the UI window, we can set the root view controller. The UI view controller can be, the UI window can be created by simply using UI window and passing in the window scene, which is on line number 19. All right. Next, we're going to say window.rootViewController. The root view controller basically means this will be your starting point for your controller. And I can go ahead and say view controller. You can see that I already have a class or a view controller added, which is called the view controller. We will not need this controller. We will construct our own controller. But right now we're using that. Window.makeKey invisible, meaning that this particular view will be our main one and it will be visible. And self.window equals to window. All right. Now, if I go ahead and run the application in a browser, in my simulator, you will see that the view controller, the one that we have over here, this one, gets fired. All right. Now, it's not really going to display much because the view controller doesn't really have any background. The view, it doesn't really have anything, so it might just show up as a black background. So what we would like to do is to change the color of the view controller, or at least the view, so we can see it, that it is rendering or not. So I'm going to simply go over here and say self.background color, or sorry, self.view.background color. You don't really need to use self. Color.red. There we go. And there we go. So it looks like our view controller is working, even though we don't really have any storyboards. Now, for this particular application, what we want to do is we want to fetch the data from a JSON API and then display it in a table view controller. So the first question is, well, where exactly are we fetching the data? Well, we're not going to use something like an actually paid account to get some stocks. I have created a very basic service that can give you the stock data. Now, let me go ahead and show you that particular service. So this is a URL, and it is hosted on Glitch. You can see that the stock data has a couple of different things. It also has historical prices and the change value and all that. All of these stock prices are all dummy fake prices. So we are only concerned about a couple of different things, these ones, that's it. So we don't really care about the change or historical prices or anything like that. We just want to display the symbol, description, and price into our UI table view controller. Okay, so that's the first thing we need. We need the URL. We need some way to invoke the service, get the data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create over here a new group. We'll call it utils. Utils will simply contain one file, which will be a constants.swift. And this is where we will simply store the actual URL of the stock. There we go. That's it. All right. So we have constants.url.allstocks, which is simply going to give us this URL. That's the purpose of constants. The next thing we need some way to fetch. So we need some sort of a API client which can fetch the results, which can perform the network call. So I'm going to go ahead and add another file. We will call it web service. Okay, so we will create a web service class over here, which will consist of a single function called getStocks. You're going to pass in the URL, and it is going to return you stocks. Now, this stocks array is basically the DTO object, the data transfer object. So let me go ahead and create another folder, and we will call it models. Now, these are not actually the domain models. They really don't have any actual logic in it, but these are the classes or structs that will be mapped to the result of the JSON. Again, we're going to go ahead and add another file. We'll call it stock, nice and simple. Now I can create a stock which is decodable, and you have to make sure that you're using decodable or codable, but I'm using decodable because the data will simply be decoded into this particular structure. What properties do we actually want? Well, looking at the actual result, we need symbol, description, and price. So there we go, symbol, description, and price. Now we will go back to our web service, and we will use the async await API. So I'm going to say URL session.shared.data with the URL, which we can simply pass in the URL. We don't really care that much about the delegate, so I can remove that part. Try await, let data response. So it's going to return two different things. It's going to return the data, and it's going to return the response. We need to make sure that the response is actually valid. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. HTTP response equals to response we're using guard let so that we can unwrap HTTP URL response. If you are able to unwrap the response, then check that the status code is equals to 200. Else, if it's not, then probably throw some sort of an error. Now, you can create your own custom error. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a stocks error, which is of type error. And the only error we have is invalid server response. And that is something that we can throw right here by saying the stocks error dot invalid server response. Maybe something bad happened and we really can't really do anything about it. It's an invalid server response error. Finally, we can go ahead and decode the data that we are getting into an array of stocks and send it back or return it from this function. So this will be our implementation of web service. Now we have to move to view models. What will our view model look like? So let's go ahead and create a new group. I will call it view models. And in the view models, I'm going to go ahead and add a different file. We'll call it stock list view model. Stock list view model. Now inside the stock list view model, we will have a function called populate stocks, where you're going to pass in the URL. It will be an async function. The populate stock function is going to take help from the web service that we just implemented, passing in the URL and using try await. The reason we're using try await is a get stocks function that we implemented is async and it can also throw an error. That's why. And now since we're using try over here, we have to make sure that we are wrapping it. This is going to return us some sort of a stocks, I guess. And we can assign it to another property if there is an error. Then for now, we can simply go ahead and print out the error. Now currently you can see that the get stocks hopefully will return an array of stocks, but these are the DTO objects or the client-side models. We don't really want them to be exposed to our view. For that, we're going to go ahead and create a view model that will contain the fields and the data that we want to display on the screen. So we'll call it stock view model. In order to create a stock view model, you need to pass in the stock. This means that we can also make sure that you can initialize it using the initializer. And now we can expose different properties that we want the UI to use. These properties can include symbol, description, as well as the price. Next, we can go back to our stock list view model, construct an array of stocks. You can see that I'm using private set, which basically means that anyone who is outside of stock list view model will not be able to set the property stocks. They can only get it, but not set it. But inside the stock list view model, I can go ahead and set it. Stocks.map stock view model.init. So these are the stocks that we are getting, which is an array of stock. We are iterating through it, and each time we iterate, we're going to call the constructor or initializer of stock view model, which is defined right there. So in the end, the map function is going to return you an array of stock view model. Okay, so this is also really good. Now we will move on to creating our actual controller. Currently, you can see that we do have a controller called View Controller, which is our root controller. But View Controller is not really a table view controller. Now, I can either rename this or I can perhaps create another controller. So I'm just going to go ahead and create another controller. We will go ahead and call it stock list view controller. The responsibility of stock list view controller is to display all the stocks in a table view. UI table view controller. All right. Now this should become your root view controller, and we can delete the view controller itself. So let's go back to the scene delegate. You can see that in the scene delegate, we're using the view controller. We can simply replace this with stock list view controller. Now, if you want the navigation bar also, then perhaps you can make your UI navigation controller as your root controller and pass in the stock list view controller as your root controller. So now in this case, the UI navigation controller is your root controller, which containing stock list view controller. And the reason that we're doing that is so that we can get access to the navigation bar and set some sort of a title like stocks. This means that we don't really need the view controller file that was created automatically, so I can delete that. Okay, so let's go back to the stock list view controller. It's currently completely empty. All right. Couple of different things we need to do. We need to fetch the stocks. In order to fetch the stocks, the code has been written inside stock list view model, and we are using the MVVM design pattern. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a stock list view model. And inside view.load, after calling view.load from the super, we can go ahead and populate the stocks. So now the question is, okay, well, how do we populate the stocks? Let's go ahead and create a function, populate stocks. Now, inside the populate stocks, we can use viewModel.populate stocks by passing in the URL, which is coming from constants.url.allstocks. The problem is that we can't really call populate stocks because it's not marked with async, or it's an async function, it's not marked with await. Now, if I try to do an await over here, then it's going to complain that the function populate stock is not marked with async. Now, let's go ahead and mark this with async. And now it's perfectly fine. But we need to call populate stocks when the page is loaded. So if I try to do this, populate stock is still not going to work because view.load is not an async function, and that's why you cannot call populate stocks inside there. So in this context, which is not the async await context, we can use task to call it in an async fashion, making sure that we are using await. All right. Now let's go ahead and run this application, and then we will simply print out the value of stocks. And you can see right there on the output window that we were able to print out the value of the stocks. So it looks like we are getting the stocks, but right now, if you look at the actual simulator, nothing gets displayed. So we need to work on that why nothing is getting displayed. All right. This means that since we're using a table view controller, we need to create table view cells. There are many different ways of creating table view cells. Let me go ahead and give you the simple one first, and then we can create a custom cell. So I'm going to go ahead and say over here, private function configure UI. And inside configure UI, we can configure many different things, like making sure that the title of the screen is large title. And now we can set the title to anything we want. I'm just going to say stocks. Apart from that, we also want to register a table view cell, which we can simply say table view dot register a particular class. Now I can say over here UI table view cell, which is a built-in class, and the reuse identifier will be stock cell. The reuse identifier is very, very important because what happens is that when you display something in a UI table view, you can reuse those cells without recreating them again and again. And that makes your UI table view scrolling super fast because it's just reusing those cells. All right. So now we're saying that the type of the cell that we're registering is UI table view cell, which already comes with some default things. We will see. Okay. The next thing we need to do is make sure that we call configure. So configure UI, there we go. And we also want to tell the table view that how many rows we will be returning. So number of rows in section vm.stocks.count. Okay, that's easy. And one of the most important function is cell for row at index path, which is going to return a particular cell. Without this function, the cells will not be added to the UI table view. So let's go ahead and do that. First, I'm going to say guard let cell, and we're going to ask the table view to dequeue the cell based on the actual identifier. So the identifier in this case is a stock cell, which you can see that that's the same identifier we set up. For index path is already set to use, so we're just going to do that. Just going to pass it. And if there's a problem, then you can go ahead and throw an error saying index cell is not defined. Nothing really we can do at that point if you have misspelled your identifier. Next, we're going to get the actual stock from the stock array. So I'm going to say let equals to stocks, and then passing in the index path.row, and finally returning the cell. Now let's see what's going on over here that it is not liking. Optional. Okay, so we are using dequeue reusable cell with identifier for this, else we are throwing well, in this case, I guess we don't even need to use this unless we are casting it like this, because we are using a guard and all that stuff. All right. And you can see that this casting doesn't really make that much sense because the dequeue reusable cell is already going to return you all of that information. So you don't really need to cast it to a UI table view cell. I think I was just getting ahead a little bit because we will be creating a custom cell eventually. Again, over here, we're not really doing much, but how can we set some of the properties of the cell? Now, in the good old days, you should be able to do it something like this, cell.textLabel. But as you can see in the message over here, that now this has actually changed, and you have to use something called UIList content configuration. So let's go ahead and see that how we can use this kind of a configuration. All right. So the first thing we need to do over here when we are setting this configuration is we need to ask that what is the actual configuration we're asking. So if you say cell dot content configuration or a default content configuration. So that is the configuration that we are getting. Just going to say content. And on this content, actually make it var, we can assign different values like text, which will be stock.symbol. And don't forget to assign the content configuration like this. All right. Let's go ahead and run this. And we will see that if it displays anything or not. You can currently see that it's not really displaying anything. And the reason it's not displaying anything is that when we're fetching stuff, which is right here, after fetching, we never reloaded the table view. So we can call table view.reload data, and we can also make sure that this is called on the main thread. So main.async. There we go. And let's go ahead and run it. And we may have to use self over here. And there we go. We are actually displaying Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Tesla, basically all the stocks we are displaying correctly. Now over here in the dispatch main async, we can go ahead and add a weak cell, so it is not holding up a reference to that if it goes away, even though our stock list view controller might be the actual root controller. If it goes away, the whole application goes away anyways. Okay. So this is great. And content configuration over here can also provide you some other benefits, like creating some sort of a secondary text. So I can go ahead and say stock.description and go ahead and run it. And now you can see the description. The problem with that approach is you are kind of limited whenever you are using default UI table view cell. So it's always a good idea to introduce your own custom cell, especially in this case, because we do want to make a little bit different stuff and we will have more control over it. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new group and we'll call it cells. And I'm going to go ahead and add a new file. I'll call it stock cell. And we will create a stock cell, which is UI table view cell. Okay. Now, in order to create a UI table view cell, we need to implement init function. And now we can call super.init, passing in the style and passing in the reuse identifier. Great. The other initializer that we'll need to implement, which is required, is the init with coder. Now, since we're not really using storyboards, so it's never really going to get fired. If, however, somehow you get it gets fired, we are going to call this error, or you can go ahead and call super. Now, we are hoping that you're not going to be using storyboard. I mean, that's the whole point of this particular exercise, that we're not using storyboard, not because they're bad or anything, but we just want to check that what happens if we are building everything using code. Okay. In the stock cell, we will have a couple of different things. We want to display the title label. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a title label property. Let's go ahead and try to see if we can display just the title itself. All right. In order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and implement a function called configure. And in configure, you're going to pass in the stock, the actual view model. And this is where we will configure stuff. So let's start with the title label. So title label.text stock.symbol. That's the first thing. Now we can add it to the content view. Content view is actually part of the UI table view cell, and that is a view which displays the content. So that's why we are going to add the title label to the content view. After that, we can go ahead and add constraints to the title, or in this case, it's a title label. So what kind of constraints we're looking for? Well, we can go ahead and add a width constraint, so it's only a certain amount of the width, so using the width anchor. We can also make sure that we have some sort of a leading constraint. So I can go ahead and say leading constraint, which means that it will have a little bit of a padding on the left side. And finally, we can go ahead and set up some sort of a center Y constraint, meaning that it will look in the middle. It will appear in the middle of the cell actual. All right. Now let's go ahead and run it. But first, we need to make sure that our stock list view controller knows about our new stock cell. So when we are registering, we need to make sure that we are registering the stock cell and not the UI table view cell. Let's go ahead and try to remove all of this code also. All of this stuff we don't really need right now. Now, another thing we need to update is that the DQ reusable cell is going to return UI table view cell, but now we can go ahead and cast it to the stock cell. If the casting fails, then, well, you did something very wrong, and the stock cell is maybe not defined. All right. Finally, after we are getting the actual stock view model from the stocks array, we can call cell, which is of type stock cell.configure, passing in the stock, and that will hopefully populate stock and also create the UI. And there we go. So effect is kind of like the same. You can see that we have all of those stocks being displayed. So that didn't change much. But now we are a little bit more flexible. If we want to display something else, like a title and a price, we can work on that. So let's go back to our stock cell. And I'm going to go ahead at this point, going to add a stock title label. So just like over here, just going to add a stock title label. Now, one of the things that you will feel over here, if you're coming from the Swift UI background, is, hey, would it be nice if you were able to see this, like what exactly you're building? And actually you can. I mean, nobody is stopping you from using the UI View Representable. Let me go ahead and show it to you what actually happens when you do that. So I'm going to go ahead and over here, just so that we can see what we are actually building and how it looks like, and we can make our changes much quicker and fast. So I'm going to use UI View Representable. I think I do have to import UI Swift UI, so let's go ahead and do that. There we go. So UI View Representable is going to allow our cell to be represented in Swift UI so that we can create some sort of a preview for it. We have to implement make UI view function, and we also have to implement the update UI view. Update UI view can be blank, that's not a big deal. But for make UI view, we need to return the actual cell. In order to construct a cell, we're going to simply say cell, stock cell, style can be whatever, default is fine, and then the reuse identifier, I'm just going to pass in stock cell, cell.configure, passing in the stock view model, we're just passing in some data, which is coming from the stock, Google price, whatever. I'm not sure what the price is of Google, but we're just going to put some dummy number and then return cell. So this is going to allow us to represent our stock cell in Swift UI. And the only thing now remaining to do is to implement the stock previews, which is a preview provider, which allows your views to have a preview. Stock cell, you can name it anything you want, but I'm just going to go with the convention and then preview provider. As soon as I use the preview provider, you're going to see that the preview kind of pops out on the right hand side, even though we're not really ready yet. So I'm just going to go ahead and say start previews, which will be some view, and it's going to return stock cell representable, the one that we just implemented earlier on. Let's go ahead and run the preview and see that what our stock cell looks like, because that's the actual cell that we are building and we are returning. So that's why I'm looking at what it will look like in a preview. So the preview, you can see, is working hard to make sure that we get some sort of a preview. Sometimes the preview can take a while. You can still see it's not really finished yet. Let's go ahead and play button. There we go. Okay, great. So this is a preview. I mean, I think it's great that we can see the preview. What will be much better if I can go ahead and add a subtitle. So let's go ahead and add a subtitle. Just like the title label, I'm just going to add subtitle. Okay, I think I have two of them now. Okay, maybe I already added it. There we go. Okay, so we have the subtitle. It's not really added anywhere, so I need to make sure that the subtitle has some sort of description going on. Stock.description. And I'm also going to make sure that the subtitle is added. So content view dot add subview and then the subtitle. Perfect. We still need to add some constraints to the subtitle, or else it's not going to show up. Okay, so what kind of a constraints we're looking for? We're looking for a width constraint. We're looking for kind of like maybe the top anchor constraint, and then we're looking for the leading. So let's go ahead and add the width constraint and refresh our view. Okay, so already you can see that our actual thing is getting added, as you can see, and that's why your previews are so important. It's basically added on the top and not where we want. We want it right there, but it's actually added on the top. So this means that our constraints are definitely missing. So let's go ahead and add a top constraint so that the top of the subtitle will be the bottom of the title. After that, you can see that it's definitely moved a little bit. So now we're getting closer, and you can definitely see that how our preview is helping us out. And now we can go ahead and add a little bit of a padding on the left. All right. The final thing is the price. So let's go ahead and add a label for the price. There we go. Okay, so we have the price label, and now we would like to display it. Well, we're going to start with the same thing. Price label.text stock.price. Now, the price is double, and you're assigning it to a string, so that's not going to work. Even the technique that I'm showing you right here, which is string interpolation, this is not a good idea to do, and we will replace that. But for now, we just want to see what the price is. But this is not a good idea because we're putting a dollar sign over here, and we are saying that all the prices will always be in dollar amount, even though my phone settings locale, it might be set to some other currency. So I don't want to see dollar if I am in a different country. Probably I want to see my currency. All right, so we'll have to fix that, but let's go ahead and add some constraints on the price also so that we can at least see the price, and then we can work on how to fix those issues. Again, we're going to go ahead and start adding these constraints on the price so that it appears. And you can see the error is actually throwing. Oh, make sure that your price is actually added. That's the number one mistake that I didn't really add. Add subview and the price label. So make sure that the price is added. You can see the price is right there now. Close, but that's not where we actually want it. We want it to be in the same exact line, just a little bit far away. There we go. All right. Now going back to the question of how can we make sure that it is displaying the correct symbol based on my locale. If I am using a phone in US and my locale is set to US, then I should see dollar sign. If it is in some European country, then it should be probably euros. So how can we make sure that? So I'm going to go ahead and create an extension folder. And inside the extension folder, I'm going to extend the double. So I'm going to say double plus extensions. And what we're doing is that we are adding some extra functionality, extending the double class, and we are adding some extra functionality to do that. Now, sorry, double structure. I said class, it's a structure, obviously, it's a value type, and I'm adding the format as currency function. Now I can go back to my stock cell, and wherever we are displaying it, I can simply say stock.price.format as currency, and it will be formatted as currency. Okay. Let's go ahead and run it. Now, when you run it, you can see it's close, but maybe you can see the little bit of padding is needed over here, right there. So this means that the row height, maybe you would want it to be a little bit much bigger. So I can go back to my view controller, which is the stock list view controller, and try to adjust the height for a row. Let's go ahead and start with 60. And it's a little bit better. You can definitely see, right? It's much better. And you can see that we're using format as currency. So if my locale now is in a different currency, it will automatically replace these dollar signs with something else. But there you have it. We have created a complete application that fetches the data from a JSON API and it puts it on the screen, all using UIKit and not using storyboard, but by typing all the code, all right, by hand. So this is a great way to learn that how things work behind the scene. And hopefully you have enjoyed this video. Thank you so much.